coming to you raw and unscripted. Beaming across Ontario and beyond.
To places like Waterford, CU Lookout, Yorkdale, and Rice Lake.
This is the Real Hickson Real Estate Podcast. Whether you're listening on your commute or putting on your suit, whether it's your morning stroll or you're on patrol, you just finished prayer or dropped the kids at daycare, you're in the bar, your car, or listening with the bathroom door ajar, near or far, this is the Jess and Giro Show. We're grateful for flattery and prone to inaccuracies. This is your guide to Toronto culture, people, events, news, but most importantly, real estate talk.
Yes, folks, we are back for another installment of the Hickson Real Estate Podcast.
With our favorite guest, even though it's been 3 years.
It's been a little while. Last time, it was unprecedented times, but for other reasons. Now we're in more unprecedented times. Shawn, say hello.
Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. In case anyone missed you in the first episode, Shawn is our mortgage specialist. You want to do a little bio on yourself there, Shawn?
My name's Shawn Stillman. I've been a mortgage broker since 2009. I'm the principal broker of Mortgage Outlet. We have over 200 agents and do about $1 billion of volume a year. And I have known these two lovely folks for way too long when my hair was dark and the mortgage market was good and the real estate market was, the land of milk and honey.
That's right. I mean, we've seen some things.
Yeah, we've seen some things.
Even like for me, I kind of caught, a lot of it. I came at the end of 2013. That's like, I've got this perfect snapshot of the last 10 years of like the most interesting part, not the most interesting, but some of the most interesting times in Canada.
Toronto.
And the world. Let's give it some context. The world is experiencing problems, and we're not immune to it over here.
No, we're catching the cold from States, as they say.
And you realize how inefficient just the market has been. There's two markets of real estate. It's either a fear of missing out or a fear of overpaying.
Yeah.
And right now we're firmly in the fear of overpaying. Mm-hmm. And people are sitting on the sidelines because they don't see a light that the market is going to get better and prices are going to continue to go up. And they're willing to wait until that happens. But the great thing is, if you're a buyer who is patient and can be picky, there's a perfect place for you right now.
That's what we keep saying.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like this idea. A lot of people tell you the market's bad, the market's slow, but it's bad for who? Okay, for a lot of the people that own property, I get it. There's devaluations in property. There are people that bought within the last, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years that may have, as you say, overpaid in those markets. But the reality is, for a lot of people, it's okay to just sit on something if you can, as long as you're not, selling in an emergency situation or in a rash situation. But then we have to look at who's actually winning. Now, we were complaining back in 2022, 2021 about how first-time home buyers, how the hell are they ever going to buy, right? And now we've come back to a situation where it's quite reasonable. Sure, is it extremely attainable? No, it's still tough to do, but it's a lot more attainable than it was. So now we're looking at a good market for first-time home buyers and a slow market if you're trying to sell or downsize, essentially, right?
Yeah, and if you think about it, nobody ever buys a house or anything right at the bottom. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter if you buy 10% from the bottom on the way up or the way down, but psychologically it sucks when you buy something and then you see it drop 10% of value over the next 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
But that's the same as waiting 6 months and buying it once it's already risen from the bottom 10%. So this is where, if you're a buyer, you get to be picky. I want a south-facing house. Mm-hmm. I want it near a park. I want it painted pink. I want a 2-car garage. There's stuff on the market now, both condos, which I think condos are a little different because I think there's going to be a lot of downward pressure still on condos, and I wouldn't rush to buy a condo because, there's so many coming online and they're so interchangeable. unless you have a view of the lake or something that's very unique about a particular building, it doesn't make sense to buy a condo.
Yeah.
But if you're buying a single family house, they're not making any more of those in the 416.
Yeah.
You know, be picky. Find the place that's going to make you happy. I was at an event last week with the chief economist of Scotiabank, and he believes that housing prices will be 20% higher 5 years from now.
Wow.
So it doesn't mean that what's going to happen over the next few months, the next year.
Yeah.
But 5 years from now, you're going to be happy that you bought now.
Yeah.
So you got to buy something now, and then basically just not look at real estate for the next 5 years, and it should be worth more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is all risk. You know, everything is risk. Waking up in the morning is risk.
Mm-hmm.
If you talk about financial risk, we can always say that whenever we leave the house, we're spending money, right?
Yeah, you can't leave the house.
You can't leave the house without spending money. That is a financial risk to leave the house. And just as an extension, you know, real estate is always going to be at risk.
But if that means, like, in 2 years from now, it's a 10% increase, will you regret not making the move today? Like, if you need to buy a house, what are you waiting for?
Yeah, and I think things change very quickly. And there's going to be some event, like just about last year when interest rates started trending down, you know, last spring there was a little bit of a rush.
Yeah.
And then rates went back up and it basically snuffed that out.
Yeah.
And I thought that we were going to kind of approach a similar thing this year, except for the orange gentleman in the States basically
he's not a gentleman. I wouldn't call him a gentleman.
Okay. The orange individual in the States, you know, who decides to basically just go on Twitter or whatever the name of his social media site is and just say like the most absolute ridiculous things.
Yeah.
He's really put a kibosh on the market.
And nobody could have seen
No,
that
and
coming.
I think that, you know, the current government in Ottawa played a lot into that and spread a lot of fear to win the election and really turned people off from buying. It's like, oh, like, who knows what's going to happen with the U.S.? We got to protect against Trump.
Yeah.
We have to do all this. Have you guys heard of the saying taco in the States?
Yeah, Trump always chickens out. It's this new acronym I got into last week.
So basically, on May 28th, there was a press conference at the White House, and a reporter asked Trump about the taco trade. Basically, do whatever the opposite that Trump says because he always chickens out. And he lost it and went ballistic because he didn't hear that saying before. And then 4 days later, he slaps the tariffs on the steel and the aluminum.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, this is something that we have to put our own house in order in Canada. And I like some of the things that the Liberal government is doing. Like, the perfect example is we are a net importer of steel in Canada. That we import more steel than we produce. Now, usually it makes sense because guess what? We produce the steel, we ship some of it to the States, but like other stuff comes in from Asia that goes to the West Coast because we don't want to ship it across the country because moving steel is expensive. But what we can do is our steel industry could support the demand internally, but what we have to then do is put tariffs on everyone else's. So because if the U.S. market is closed, everyone else is not dumping steel in the U.S. They're dumping it in Canada and other provinces. So we have to protect our own industry. And do you know what the best thing you could build with steel is? A freaking pipeline, right?
Yeah, there you go.
You know, it's like you could basically build a pipeline, solve the energy crisis, solve the steel crisis, and be done. And like, you know, it's a very easy solution. I just don't think there's the... he's like, Carney is enjoying talking out of both sides of his mouth right now. But we'll see what happens. As most politicians do.
Yeah.
Wait, you're acting like they're not politicians.
Yeah, well.
Okay, so let's, we're definitely going to dive into all the economy stuff. Let's give a little bit of context. Okay, what is actually happening in the market in different sectors? Jess, you want to start us with this?
Well, let's ask the person who's doing the pre-approvals and the refinances.
Okay. Let's start with that. Who's getting the pre-approvals right now?
I would say there are very few first-time home buyers who are making the jump. And if you see what's happened with rents, the rents have gone down. There are articles out there that, you know, landlords are offering $500 gift cards to sign up. Huge incentives to rent condominiums now that there isn't the demand for the condos. What we do see is there are people moving up, people selling one property, buying another property. And where we're seeing people run into trouble is that they own a condominium and they want to buy a house.
Right.
Because the condo market is pretty much illiquid right now. So they cannot sell their condo. And you really have to sell your condo first before you buy your house.
And you most likely would have had to have a solid chunk of equity in there.
Like you would have had to buy it at least 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, like the prices are down to 2019.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When we see an appraisal from a condominium, if the appraisal's over $1,000 a square foot right now, like lenders don't accept that.
Yeah.
Really?
Maybe Yorkville, maybe some very like high end buildings, which is like then you're approaching like 1,300 a square feet. There's a building in Yorkville right now that's registering, and I think they were selling it at 1,700 a square foot, and the appraisals are coming back at 1,300. So there are people that paid $1 million for a 600 square foot unit, and it's coming back at 700 and change.
Wow.
So there's a lot of people that are having real issues with that.
Yeah.
And we can kind of get into that. And the market has kind of hidden this. One thing that builders have done is they've gone to banks and gotten something called a blanket appraisal. And RBC is a blanket appraisal on this property that they're basically... RBC will do a mortgage based on the original purchase price, even though the actual value has gone down now. So if you could get an RBC mortgage, amazing. But if you're an alternative lender or someone who can't qualify, you're really between a rock and a hard spot.
What allows them to do that?
So I think it comes down to risk management. So they can basically say an appraisal is worth whatever they want. And I think someone like RBC, who might have had the construction mortgage on this property, says, would I rather have one person owe me $500 million, or would I rather have 200 people owe me $500,000 each? And it basically spreads the risk around, and then that allows them to close. Because if they can't close, then that puts their loan in potential default.
And they know these people are not going to offshoot these properties in the next year or two. So by the time they get rid of them, they'll probably be back up in value.
Absolutely. Well, maybe.
Let's hope.
Let's hope. But there has to be the change. There has to be something that drives the mindset change. And I think that there's really kind of two things that has to happen. One, this is going to sound terrible because I don't think any of us hope that there's a major recession. But if there's a major recession and major job losses, then, we talk about the Bank of Canada quantitative easing, printing money, lowering interest rates, money for everybody. And it's not that the prices will necessarily go down or up, but I think that kind of like inflation will start eating away. Because if you think about, $100 today is not worth the same as $100 from 5 years ago.
No.
And, so even though dollar for dollar prices might go up, the actual base value might have gone down.
Yeah.
And I know somebody had a condominium, they owned part of an apartment building in Edmonton, and they bought it in 2016. And due to timing and Edmonton, the wrong idea, and they just sold it now, and they got basically back exactly the money they paid for it in 2016.
Wow.
And they were ecstatic. It's I didn't lose any money.
Yeah, but you did.
But if you put the same amount in the stock market, you've lost pretty much 50% of your money because it would have gone up. Yeah. But it's a psychological thing.
Yeah, it's the sound of the number, not actually the value of it.
So, and I think, it's probably going to take 5 to 10 years for condos to go back up. Yeah. And it depends what happens with immigration. Depends what happens. Does the federal government cut immigration as much as they said that they were going to cut immigration? How does that impact Ontario and Toronto? Because there's places like Brampton that basically houses were chopped up and they were renting basement rooms for $1,000. That's not happening anymore.
No, and so people were getting qualified on the basis that they could rent their basement apartment for $2,000-$3,000.
Exactly. So I think that there's more pain coming. And we went too far one way in a pendulum, and we're kind of swing back, and we'll go back too far the other way, and we'll kind of find
I think there's some interesting questions about immigration. We have obvious ideas of where the previous immigration has come from, but, the way things are going in the States, for example, maybe we do start to get, some of these higher profile immigrants. We're talking about, people in tech and people in good paying jobs that want to leave for various reasons. We have people that would normally go to the States, doctors, lawyers, engineers, etc., start coming more to Canada. I know that we already have a lot of these people, and we talked about it in a previous meeting where there are a lot of these people from certain countries that are engineers that just aren't recognized, can't get the work. Mm-hmm. It would just be, I think it's just going to be an interesting time to see where they start to come from.
Yeah, like, we're all the children of immigrants. Like, I know I think we're tailors, like, originally when they came. My grandfather, like, even though he was born here, like, was in the woodworking industry. And we all kind of build off our generations have passed. And, people who come here initially, we do need unskilled labor in there. We need somebody who wants to work the minimum wage job at Tim Hortons. And there was a time that, like, nobody wanted to do those jobs. I think I saw the unemployment rate in Toronto was almost, I want to say it was 8 or 9% last month. Yeah. So, like, the problem is there's a mismatch between the jobs that we have and the people coming in. It's like, well, we're bringing in 80,000 people a month, but we're only creating 10,000 jobs. Well, then where does that lead? Yeah. And we're kind of constantly on this hamster wheel, not getting ahead. Yeah. And, this is going to sound a little bit maybe like discriminatory, but, like, when was the last time you were in an Uber and the driver was somebody who was here for a long period of time?
Yeah.
It seems that, like, there's a lot of people that, and this is not, like, I commend those people because they're working and they're scratching and clawing.
Yeah, they do a lot of hours.
They do a lot of hours.
2 to 3 jobs.
And, like,
sometimes.
this is not something that is to look down on them. Like, they're doing everything possible to get ahead. Yeah. And, I commend them for that. And the challenge is if there's not enough work for them, are we doing people a disservice by opening the gates and bringing in immigrants when we can't house them properly, we can't give them employment, and our healthcare system is very strained as it is.
I mean, people have said, my son can't or my daughter can't work at Tim Hortons. But let's be realistic about this. I used to work in hospitality in Canada for a few years. I have seen every sort of person come in and go straight back out that door. They come for a week, they leave for a week. You're lucky if you get someone hanging around for longer than a summer or a year or a 2 year. And it's this funny dynamic in hospitality where they're either not great and they just kind of hang around, you kind of want them to quit, or they're too good and they just move on to other places. Obviously, like, every level of hospitality is different. But my point is, let's say your son or daughter did want to work at Tim Hortons. Like, do they have the work ethic that these people coming here that are maybe a little bit more desperate? They come from cultures that have a better work ethic. They will stick it through. They will keep that job. They will get a second job. They will do those over hours that maybe the typical native-born Canadian wouldn't be prepared to do.
Or will they squeeze into a one-bedroom with a family of 4?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you really have to, when your feet are to the fire, you decide what you're made of and how you're going to succeed.
Okay, so, just to go back quickly through what is happening, we talked about rentals. I mean, it's mixed demand. I'm seeing some entry-level condos quite in demand. Obviously the more expensive stuff, the 2 bedrooms, the 3 bedrooms. That's kind of a funny thing because as people can't afford, like, a townhouse, for example, they might more likely go into a 3 bedrooms. 3 bedrooms are rare, but, at least for the 2 bedrooms, maybe that limbo. I've been putting a lot of my clients kind of into a 2 bedroom of the last, like, couple years, specifically just because I've said to them, hey, you're paying, or they were paying $2,500 for a 1 bedroom, and their buddy, family member, or friend is paying $2,400. Why don't you guys go into a 2 bedroom? You're now, $1,600 a piece. They have been doing that, but it seems like that kind of thing has slowed down. I think, we have a pretty balanced market in terms of freehold rentals and just condo rentals in general. And we have the demand, but there's also the inventory there as well. And I think this is also, as we mentioned, the condo market that's suffering. A lot of people saying, let's try and rent it at the same time. So we're trying to sell it, we're trying to rent at the same time.
I'm seeing more and more homes for lease instead of for sale.
Yeah, because it's people kicking the can down the road. And I think that the city of Toronto vacant home tax, I think, is a bit of a joke.
Yeah.
Because I don't think people ever willingly say my house is vacant.
Yeah.
And, you know, the worst thing ever, which is says everything you need about government, the city of Toronto owns part of Toronto Hydro and the heart of the Toronto Water.
Yeah.
Right.
All that they need to do is say there's 3 houses, you're using this much water.
Get a neighborhood average.
House A is using this much water. House B is using the same amount within 10%.
Yeah.
House C is using 10% of the water.
Yeah.
That house is vacant.
Yeah.
And
they have the information.
They have the information. And I think especially in condos, I think there's a lot of condos that are just sitting vacant.
Right.
And I have a good friend, his name is Mark Morris, he's a lawyer, and he basically tells a story that when the condos were being sold, he went to the Shanghai property show. And basically they were just selling floors of condos in Toronto, and people were buying like buildings. Like it's like, oh, I want a whole floor. Because it was just a way of getting money out of China.
Yeah.
And these people, okay, they have the money to close, and then what are they going to do? They're going to sell the condos, pay like, you know, foreign withholding tax on it.
No,
the money's just to sit on here, and they don't necessarily care.
If they're
I'm losing
monthly,
a couple of $1,000s a month because it's just sheltering an asset overseas.
Yeah.
So just to go through that for people who aren't aware of that, they have an idea of Chinese investors, but maybe they don't understand the whole story. Basically, then you could probably explain it better than I can. Basically, you know, the way that China is run, it's state first and people second. And the people that make a lot of money, they're restricted in how much foreign stock they can buy outside of the country, right?
Yeah, I don't know the exact details, but I do know that there was a great desire to invest in Canada. Canada was seen as a very safe place until, you know, this, I think it was the CEO of the telecom company got arrested.
Yeah, Huawei.
You know, there was the 2 Michaels getting detained there. We were like basically a place that China was parking money, and then that kind of turned on a dime. And then they said, okay, like, you know, it dried up the market. And then on top of that, the foreign buyer ban, you know, also, even though it wasn't maybe an impact on the resale market, but on the pre-construction market, it was a huge impact. It basically said to the world, Canada's not a place to invest in. Yeah. And, you know, go somewhere else.
Well, the other thing that happened was they changed the rules on students and how much they could work here. And one of the dynamics that we had here was parents trying to pull their money out of China in a safe way, kind of using properties as like a bank of sorts, because there's at any moment the Chinese government could seize their assets, and that's just the reality of it. So they wanted to put their money somewhere, and where else better to put it in a property where their child can go and study abroad, and therefore, you know, they could use the postgraduate degree in order to get permanent residency. That was a dynamic and a way of getting their residency and their status here, whilst also, you know, holding onto these properties. The alternative was, you know, with no employment and no credit, they were paying a year up front for these rentals. And a lot of landlords, of course, enjoyed that. Yeah. And were, you know, still dealing in rentals where the expectation is still kind of there. And we were at a crazy time last summer and the summer before where it was just like, give us 12 months up front or nothing. Yeah. And as I said, unfortunately, some landlords still have that kind of mentality, but it's all fully reversing on them now.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the rentals. So now we have the investors. It's a knock-on effect for that. Now, not all investors are created equal. Some have one property that they're renting out and they themselves are renting something else. Some investors have only a couple of properties. Of course, there are, you know, the moguls that have multiple properties. And I guess it's a bit of a downsizing for the investors.
Well, I think if you look at the math, being a landlord of one individual condo or having condo units, there's a lot working against you. And the number one is the condo fees. Yeah. Like condo fees, it's like, oh, it's 50 cents a square foot.
Not anymore.
Condo fees are $1 a square foot on average.
Yeah.
They've gone up tremendously.
Yeah.
and especially in the older buildings that have deferred maintenance, they're going to continue to go up.
Yeah.
And what I would say is the government is also through CMHC and through their rental program where you could buy 4-plexes, 5-plexes, 6-plexes, and amortize it over a longer term, get a rate. Those are much better investments now from a cash flow point of view than condominiums.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's kind of go through it. Who's losing the most right now? Who's suffering the most?
Somebody who bought a pre-sale condo at any point that they have not taken possession on, because they have they have very few good choices to close. Number one, and if they can close, not lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. And from recent studies that we've seen, is that between 20 and 40% of condos in new buildings don't actually close, and it's a kind of a big secret. And the reason why, how that number's known, because the builders aren't telling you that, but it's the real estate agents who sold those units who are basically getting the builders saying, give me back my commission.
Oh my
Really?
God.
Because if you sold a pre-sale condo and they said, well, we're going to pay you a percent of your commission.
Yeah, they do it over a schedule.
Yeah.
And that deal doesn't close.
They want it back.
They're coming back to real estate agents.
And by the way, you're chasing builders at the best of times for the commissions.
Yeah, so
But they'll chase you right back.
they'll chase you right back.
Yeah.
So that's like a thing, like builders are not closing. And so what's happening is that I heard last week that basically on the bank's balance sheet there's about $32 billion of unsold condominiums sitting right now.
Wow.
And that's going very much under the radar.
And that's going under the radar.
But here's the interesting thing, because there is all this, and there's tons of inventory. I think what do we read today? How many months of inventory for the condos?
I think 8 months.
I think 8 months of inventory for the condos, and an average of 4 months for townhouses, semis, and detached. Yeah. But essentially, there is a fundamental issue with inventory. We still don't have enough houses.
But it comes down to, once again, is it the right inventory? And there's who wants to live in a 300 square foot studio apartment?
Yeah.
No. And it comes down to it is that the builders were building stuff that made sense at a price point that they wanted.
Yeah, for them to make money.
Right. But the other thing is you could look down the road to 2028, 29, 30. There's going to be no condos coming on the market.
No.
Yeah.
So at some point, it's going to turn, and there's going to be the demand, and there's not going to be the supply.
The amount of things that are being held now,
but that's not it's never going to get built, right? And I drove by on the way here, and you see all the signs in the city of Toronto, like this land's being redeveloped for a condominium. They're never going to build that.
No.
My parents are 78 and 80, and it's like, oh, we're worried that they're going to build a condo and there's going to be a lot of traffic. And I said to my father, they're not going to finish building this if they build it until you're 90.
Yeah.
And it's he kind of chuckled and said, okay, I won't worry about it. Because the development charges and the actual cost to build a condominium unit right now is more than what they could sell it for. Yeah. And so one thing has to give. Either prices have to go up, costs have to go down, or I guess 3 things, or development charges have to go down. Yeah. And will the cities get smart and change development charges?
Well, that's the news we're hearing now is the York region cut their development charges in half. And, the question's always, okay, let's say the development charges are completely removed. Are the builders going to pass those savings on to the buyers?
Well, yeah, because otherwise they're never going to build it. It has to make sense for them to build a condo, sell it, and right now there's the fear of overpaying, and that fear is going to continue until it becomes back down to an equilibrium. If you think about it in hindsight, hey, you could buy a condo now for, let's say, $1,000 a square foot, but you could also buy a condo 6 years from now for $1,200 or $1,300 square foot. It kind of does sound ludicrous that people are willing to pay up so much for it.
Yeah, we were hearing these projections. And was it fair for these developers to project these high numbers, and at the time,
to bake it into the price.
you know, of course, it's all and it's all demand. Like if a buyer's like, that's crazy, I'm not going to buy that, and everybody says that, obviously they're going to have to reconsider, and that's exactly what they're doing right now. Is they're going to reconsider their prices. But as you said, it's a two-way street. At a certain point, if they're not making money anymore, they're not going to develop these places.
But for so many years, you could sign your paper for pre-construction. 4 years later, you made $100,000, $200,000. You did nothing.
Well, and I think it's human nature that people like to brag when things go well. And when you could sit around a table with your friends and say, oh, I bought a condo for X and I sold it for, 50% more, and all I did was basically buy it now and wait. Yeah. Like, it makes it seem like this is easy money.
It felt like you were hitting a jackpot.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me, coming here in 2014, that was the first thing I said. I said, like real estate's like relatively cheap around here. And to me it was, because we had gone through this in Sydney. Yeah. We were like 8, 9, 10 years in the future, where we had the Asian market pressure, because we're so close to Asia in Australia, and we had these nice cities, not unlike Vancouver or San Francisco or some of these cities that, attracted a lot of the Asian global market. We had the similar cities, and it was the same issue. Our issue really was, again, there's not enough inventory. Now, we're lucky in Ontario. We have, it's up to you whether you decide whether you should develop this beautiful farmland or a green space or not. But we do have a lot of flat developable land, as opposed to Sydney. It's full of, you're going to hit the mountains at one point. We have a lot of national parks. We have a lot of kind of waterways similar to Vancouver, in my opinion. And the most expensive way to build is up. And that's sometimes the only option. So the GTA it's pretty big right now. We go out to Stouffville, we go to Uxbridge. There's massive developments out there, all over the joint, and so we're seeing a huge change. Okay, so who is winning? Who is winning right now, in your opinion, Shawn?
Who is winning? Somebody who has the ability to buy a place and not sell a place, because they have all the power and all the flexibility to be extremely picky. On what they want.
No pressure.
No pressure. It's you're not getting into a bidding war. Like, I hear clients say, oh, there's a bidding war on this, and I literally laugh. Yeah. Like, there was one of my clients said, oh, like, we want to put an offer on this condominium. It's priced at $800,000, but it's like, it's worth $1 million. And like, they priced it $200,000 less to get a bidding war. Yeah. They're not going to get a bidding war. No. What they're going to do is they're going to get one offer for $800,000. And then what's gonna happen is then they're gonna say, nope, we don't want it, and they're gonna relist it for $1 million. Because there's simply not the demand to be this.
There's not the upward pressure.
And the buyer that there's one offer, they're not gonna come in at $1 million. There's no reason for them to.
No, but where it is if you're a buyer and you want something, and you could basically come in and either with a cash offer or even with financing, put a financing condition in there, you could dictate the terms. You could say, I want a closing date of this, I want this, and in 9 out of 10 cases, you're going to be the only person that's negotiating with the seller to basically say, if you don't sell it to me, I'm going to go up a foot. It's a condominium. I'm going to go to the next thing and I'm going to get something. Or I'm going to look for a house down the street. Or I'm just simply going to wait. Like, not having pressure is a very powerful negotiating tool. Like, I want a 90-day closing. I want this, and this. Like, there's one file we're working on that there's a closing literally in, I think, November or December.
Really?
Wow, that's a long close.
Well, because he has to sell his place.
Yeah, he needs the time.
And you know what? That seller probably wants him or her to be able to do that. Yeah. Otherwise they're not closing.
They'll take it because they want it to close.
Yeah. But just to that point, I think the market is pretty mixed. I think there are some places that are, if they're priced quite well and they're good properties, they are selling. I'm talking about like very specific niche pockets that have huge long-term inventory issues. So people are making those kinds of moves. But even, let's say out in the east in Pickering, you saw a house that had an offer presentation. I hate calling them bidding wars because, we're devaluing the buyer's money. And at the time, people were putting up good offers where buyers were coming up with good, hard-earned money, and sellers were turning around saying, no, that's not good enough. Now that the script has been completely switched, and we did see an offer presentation. I'm going to call them offer presentations to be respectful to both sides. and we did see, I think a month and a half ago, we saw an offer presentation where there was multiple offers on a somewhat entry-level home. And basically, out of the 5 offers, the seller didn't even get close to what they wanted. And guess what that tells the seller? This is what the market actually thinks your home is worth.
Yeah.
And
the market tells you.
And all this to say that the buyers are like, I don't care that there's it's almost like the buyers were jaded. Maybe some of these people have been through it before, or they've heard enough stories to be like, years. Okay, cool. These people want to overpay. That's absolutely fine. I'm not going to overpay.
Right, and that's where the patience comes in. The other thing to really highlight is that employers are starting to make people come back to the office.
Yes.
We had RBC and Scotiabank that I saw in the last week say we expect people back 4 times per week in the office. And as if we go into a recession and unemployment increases, who is the lender, or lender in the case of RBC and Scotiabank, who is the employer going to cut? The person that they see every day, or the person who is off, mowing their grass?
Out of sight, out of
mind.
Out
of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
So I think when you say where are the winners, single-family houses in the city of Toronto, near employment centers, because all of a sudden, working from your pajamas is not going to be possible for a lot of people, and commuting is going to become another issue. And the city of Toronto has done everything possible to make commuting a disaster. Whoever planned stuff should be, I'd like to say, executed, but I can't say that. Executed, shot.
Taken out to the barn.
Taken out to the barn, because who in their right mind takes University Avenue, which was a 4-lane road in each direction, and basically turned it into 2? They added a bike lane in each direction, and they added these parking spots that can't be moved during rush hour. Allow parking, not during rush hour.
Not in rush times,
but don't put up cement things that you can't drive on them. The dining in the city of Toronto, why do you allow restaurants to block roads?
We don't have enough parking to begin with.
One restaurant on Yonge Street between Yonge and Eglinton and Yonge and Lawrence blocks 1 lane of traffic. Does that make any sense? They've done everything possible to make this city impossible to live in. And with more cars driving, the TTC is a disaster. Proximity to your work is going to become important again. About how are you going to commute to work? Are you going to want to drive from Barrie to downtown 4 days a week or 3 days a week? And as, we progress, we're going to start going back. Ontario's really lagged behind about return to work, and Canada as a whole. And, could definitely see that that's going to basically force people to sell in the 905, move back to the 416, because people are going to want to be close to where they live. So single family houses near public transit and near places of work, I could see be huge.
You heard it here first, guys. If you're in that category, you're doing well.
But also, obviously downsizers are in a good position. If you bought your house 30, 40 years ago, you have equity, you lost $100,000, it's not going to be the biggest thing on them.
Yeah, but what we're also seeing is that people want to stay in their house longer. The amount of, I would say, bad press nursing homes got during COVID.
Yes.
And also people who have a lot of equity in their homes. I'm not a fan of reverse mortgages, allowing you to pull equity of your house, basically not make payments. Because I believe there's a lot better solutions out there because the interest rates are a lot higher. Usually between 2 and 3% above market rates. But, if you want to stay in your house, you could stay in your house a very long time. And we have a lot of clients who are not downsizing. We have a lot of clients who are just making do with their house because, my house is paid for, okay, I have to pay property taxes, utilities. Where else am I going to move?
Yeah, which is less than probably the maintenance fees if they were to look at in a large condo.
Exactly. And also, a lot of these condos are just, is this a sense of community?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them have a lot of renters. It's like, I will think back, probably like 5 or 10 years. My grandmother, when she sold her house, she lived at Glencairn and Bathurst,
Mm-hmm.
and she bought a condominium on Covington, which is directly north of Lawrence Plaza.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like brand new condominium. It was like 1,200 square feet at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And like she had a community there because it was all people. It's like playing bingo one night, playing mahjong another night, doing some movie night. Like it's like we try to go out for dinner with her.
She's busier than you.
Yeah, and like she was busier than us because we tried to schedule a dinner. And senses of communities people are searching for.
Yeah.
And the condominiums today, because of the number of renters, are a very tough place to find that.
Yeah, it's not the same.
Yeah. I mean, the Airbnb was a massive problem at one point. I think, we know that Airbnb still exist when maybe they shouldn't. Some buildings do allow it, but, that creates that transient, uncommunity-like buildings.
It's also people don't care. Like, the saying, your house is your castle.
Yeah.
If you're renting, you don't give
They
a
don't feel the same.
You don't care.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm going to do the bare minimum just so I don't have headaches.
Yeah.
But they will
not maintain
same way.
way.
It's not the same way.
And then you can say, okay, rather than buying a condo in the city, not that it's completely comparable, but if you were to buy a townhouse, in a much further out community that's somewhat comparable in price, you have to ask that person, are you okay with living out there? We did this in the pandemic. Everyone said, oh, great, we can work from home forever. That's why they started moving out, and that's why they started blowing up these...
Small
they're not
towns.
quite rural. They were rural. They're a lot more connected now than they used to be. They're past the GTA. And that's really the question. The other thing is, as you said, like, what's the commute like? And that's why a lot of people are coming back. They moved out to even Barrie and just...
And look what happened to cottage country.
Yeah.
Well, cottage country, you know what? There's a lot of people who bought cottages, and I own a cottage. I've owned one for, I guess, 8 or 9 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I love it up there, but I'm also handy and I can look after it.
Yeah.
Like, I get up to the cottage now and it's like, literally, what can I fix?
Yeah,
and I have a mental list.
It's not a relaxing.
Yes, there's something very powerful about using a chainsaw. And but what I'm saying is, a lot of people bought cottages because it's like, the cool in thing to have. They were Airbnb-ing them out, and they were making a lot
fortune,
of profit.
yeah.
And we both know somebody who owns a cottage and rents it out very successfully.
Yes.
And that is still a good business model because Airbnb is allowed up in most of these jurisdictions. That's not allowed
in the city.
Yeah.
But it's a full-time business.
Yeah.
And I can see that the cottages have kind of hit a plateau.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing with cottages is there's just not that many of them. So a few transactions gets to move the market greatly.
Right.
Like if you look at Halliburton or Muskoka, like how many transactions are there in a year? 100 on lakes, 150 on lake.
Mm-hmm.
Like all
they
of
move
a
lot slower. They're used to slower markets.
All of a sudden, like selling of 20 cottages skews numbers greatly.
Right.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden 20 more get listed.
Yeah.
Problem. All
It
of a
looks
sudden
bad,
20 less
yeah.
get listed. There's so that becomes that. What I've really been telling clients lately, and I know this is a sappy answer, being an accountant, being a mortgage broker, is what will make you happy?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, that will living in Barrie make you happy?
Mm.
Yes, I have a pool, I can work remotely, great. Will living in Barrie make you happy? Well, I have a pool, but I have to spend an hour and 20 minutes on the GO train every day.
Yeah.
Each way.
Yeah.
Each way, yeah.
So it's like all of a sudden I'm spending 2.5 hours commuting.
Out of
No,
your
that's
day,
not going to make me happy. And focusing on what makes you happy across everything,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, the commute, the location, the neighbors, the house itself, it usually leads you in the right direction.
Yeah.
And we've gotten away from happiness, and this sounds so sappy, I can't believe I'm saying this, because for the longest time...
After hours.
No, but for the longest time, it was buy real estate, you're going to make money, and it was purely a financial decision.
Yeah.
But it's so much more than a financial decision
Yeah.
right now. And what I say to people is owning a property in this area right now going to make you happy. yes, I've outgrown my house, we're having another kid, we only have one bedroom, yes, we need a place. Okay, that gives you a clear path on how to proceed. Nah, like, I'm okay, it's like, I don't want to take on more debt, so at this point, don't move.
Right.
And if you focus on what makes you happy, that's the path you should follow.
Yeah. We always say to people, where do you want to wake up and start your day? What does that look like? Are you going to be happy if you wake up and you know you have a 2-hour trip to the office? No.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is like the end goals, which you're talking about. There's the balance in between of, the first home is not going to be perfect. Then there may be 1 or 2 or 3 after that as stepping stone homes.
Yeah.
And every time you're making less and less sacrifices, maybe it is distance, maybe it is the size of the home. But essentially, it's what lifestyle can you do for a period of time, like where are you going to get to next, and
that you can afford.
That you can afford, and not live above your means. But speaking of which, so where are mortgage rates right now? Where are they maybe headed?
I think mortgage rates on the fixed side are pretty much going to be stable. I can see maybe a little downward pressure. Fixed rates, both 3 and 5 years, are right around 4%, like 399, 404, 409, depending on loan to value, whether it's at a bank or at a monoline lender. I don't really see that moving a lot. Simply put, I think the market has fairly priced in probably a couple rate cuts over the next 12 months. Timing of rate cuts really depends on how strong the economy is, what the unemployment numbers are. So, for example, Scotiabank is actually scheduling and pricing in no rate cuts this year. BMO's pricing in a couple. One of them will be right, one of them will be wrong.
Yeah.
But statistically, there's about a 50% chance that there's going to be rate decreases on the variable side. 30% chance rates are going to remain static, but there's a 20% chance rates are going to go up. So, and realize that as rates go down, at some point they're going to go up again. So the market is pricing in rates right around 399 for both 3 and 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, we've been here before, and like this kind of mortgage market, we've been here, 2018, 2019, where mortgage rates were hardly in the news. Announcements were hardly looked at. You know what I mean? It went up a little bit, it went down a little bit. And for all those at home, when we're talking about the fixed rates, they can move independently to the Bank of Canada announcements, whereas the variable rate is pretty much tied to it. And as you brought up recently, the fixed interest rates actually went up a little bit because of the economy dive that happened kind of last 2 months.
Well, no, so actually, like, fixed rates are basically what the market thinks variable rates are going to do over that term.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So, like, that's why, like, the market is pricing in, really kind of 2 rate cuts over the next 12 months, depending on timing. It's kind of like if you expect the Maple Leafs to lose in the playoffs and the Maple Leafs lose in the playoffs, you're not disappointed because what you expected to happen has happened. So only when the unexpected happens do fixed rates move. And so when there's surprise, when there's either higher unemployment, lower unemployment, growth is higher than expected, lower than expected, do the rates move? So we actually had really good GDP numbers in Canada in Q1, 2.2% growth. And that basically said, well, the Canadian economy isn't faltering as much as we think.
Right.
Unemployment's an issue, but the Canadian economy is still kind of chugging along. Also,
Shawn, by the way, like, this is perfect segue into my next question, which is about the economy, Shawn.
Okay, well, so
I can't go past a segue without announcing a segue. That's a fantastic segue, Shawn.
So the other thing is that inflation numbers dropped drastically in April, and the main reason for that is the carbon tax fell off.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, gas became cheaper, heating became cheaper, energy became cheaper. That's a short-term thing.
Shelter costs have been coming down with the rates.
Food costs have been going up.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, if you've seen the price of meat recently, it's like
you might as well be a vegetarian.
Yeah.
So, obviously there's a lot of question marks about the economy. That's the big issue right now is this, I think people are using the uncertainty meters. There's actually a website I've referred to before in this podcast about how uncertain things are. And I think that's like the newest hot, buzzword that people are using. Things are just so uncertain and unprecedented. I think we used to use unprecedented. We've moved on a little bit from that because it's a brave new world essentially. Where do you see the stability in the economy?
The stability is that I think Canada has finally realized we have to get our house in order.
Yeah.
That we have to basically have, trade barriers broke down. It seems that a lot of provinces are on board. Quebec is a bit of a holdout.
Yep.
Because they're special. But no, it's why should we be buying California wine and not BC wine?
Yeah.
Why not?
No, exactly. Why the heck is there beef from New Zealand in Loblaws?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. If we look after ourselves and we basically use this as a time to make us stronger, it won't matter who's in the White House because, in 4 years, Mr. President Trump will be there. And
well,
God willing.
No.
It's not tracking that way, but...
Well, no, but he's
it
not.
It won't affect us in the same way.
Yeah.
No, it's like in life. If you're responsible for yourself and you look after yourself,
yeah,
then it doesn't matter what anyone else does.
Yeah.
And hopefully this was a really kick in the can, a wake up call that we have the most natural resources of pretty much any country in the world, pretty much outside of Russia.
Yeah.
And we could be like Norway. Think about it this way: Norway sells all of their oil and has maybe $1 trillion investment. I don't know if it's trillion, billions of dollars of investments that they could use to spend on green energy, spend on anything else, because they've taken all of their oil and done that. And I forget what number the Premier of Alberta said, but if we were to build another 2 pipelines and sell the oil, I think it was something $35 billion a year that Alberta would get. It was either 35 in total or 35 each. I forget the exact number. And how much the Canadian government get. How much money, if you had $35 billion more, then you can have all these pet products.
Yeah.
You can have dental care.
Yeah.
You can have farmer care. You could spend all this stuff.
Yeah.
But it becomes a trade-off. You got to basically use what we've been given as a country.
Yeah.
And
create continuity, break down the barriers. The funny thing about Alberta, as you mentioned, it was actually in a trade surplus for itself. There was a deficit with the rest of Canada. So, it would be nice just, as I said, just to see a bit of continuity and, tap into what we have.
Together instead of being separate.
Yeah, exactly. And now we're talking about licenses crossing borders as well. So an electrician, now we're going to have, change dynamics of just domestic, what do you call it? Domestic immigration? What would you call that?
Yeah, I think
people moving into province.
Labor mobility.
Yeah, labor mobility. Now you can have an electrician that is out of work in northern BC and in one of the small towns move to Alberta, or he can move to Ontario or the East Coast.
Well, I know in mortgage agents and mortgage brokers, we're part of it as well, that they're gonna and we could already do labor mobility. I'm personally licensed in 6 provinces. Oh wow! But the problem is every one of them still has a different educational course that teaches me exactly the same thing.
Right.
And I'm doing we had to do a private mortgage course in Ontario last year. Passed it, no problem. And I have to do one in Alberta this year.
Right.
And I think I'm up to 5 hours of
the same thing.
The same thing, and it's just give me the exam, right?
Yeah.
Don't make me watch all these videos.
Yeah.
But it's there's some of the things still have to be worked out.
Yeah.
And there's things that make sense to have provincial bodies, and there's things that make sense to have federal bodies. Do we need a medical association in each province? Maybe. Maybe not. Do we need to have CPAs? Guess what? CPA Ontario and Quebec separated from CPA Canada.
Right.
Does that really make any sense? No. If you're an accountant in Ontario, you're an accountant in BC. There's certain nuances that are different. Lawyers, okay, laws are different in different provinces. Right. It makes sense. Accounting is accounting.
Yeah.
How about a bridging course? How about a smaller bridging course that they identify the key differences between doing taxes in Ontario and taxes in BC, and whether it's tiny or it's a bit bigger in scope? That makes sense, right?
No, it makes complete sense. But cents in government. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll see. I would say my biggest issue, seeing Toronto go through this huge real estate boom in the last 10 years, and just, sticky fingers, watching the hands of the politicians in an unprecedented time. For them, it's a positive unprecedented time of all of a sudden there's a lot of money, international serious money, flowing into the province. Ontario being one of the major magnets of this money. Obviously it's Canadian wide, but watching these politicians that are used to, business as usual kind of stuff, watching the money flow through the fingertips, and some of it gets stuck. And my point is, we have an issue with some bureaucracy at different levels of government and red tape, as we know, and it's just like mismanagement at all different levels. Like at a micro scale, listening to my buddy that works in government, working in the transport industry, hearing the issues that he's putting up with, similar to people working at a bank, for example, and the same kind of issues. And it just seems like at all levels there's just this like mismanagement, middle management issues. Could be different for every situation, but the biggest issue for me is this money flowing. Okay, let's say we join all the provinces and we start making an extra $60 billion a year. How can that be appropriated in a sustainable and smart way?
And for the citizens to actually use it.
Well, hopefully the biggest change we're going to see is that prices go down. So all of a sudden the steaks will become more reasonable because they're coming from Alberta. The wine will be less because it's coming from BC. And we do that. And also, like I said with steel earlier on, like produce steel in Ontario, sell it to BC. But getting about government not using stuff wisely, just think about what is going to happen in 3 years from now when the land transfer tax on new condominiums stops for the city of Toronto and the province of Ontario. Like I just did a very quick calculation. Like let's say there's 40,000 units come on board, which is probably a rough number. The average price is $600,000 and the average land transfer tax is 2%. That's $500 million. That basically the city of Toronto is not going to have in 2028 and 2029.
Which they've been consistently getting.
Which they've been getting, and they've gotten drunk on this. So guess what? Property taxes have to go up by $500 million.
So it ends up costing the residents that are currently living in these places.
Exactly. And same with the province of Ontario. Like land transfer taxes. Like the city of Toronto has a land transfer tax on a house over $3 million. Like what's that? 5% the land transfer tax. Like maybe that's a reason people are not buying houses over $3 million.
Sure.
There's a time when people say enough's enough, and you just can't keep on taxing the rich because then the rich just say no more.
That's a huge amount of money that's not coming in. The roads are already not being fixed.
Well, this is the thing. The municipal fees, the taxes went up in Toronto, and yet they went up, 15-20%, something like that? And yet the roads are not 15 to 20% nicer. They still have just as many potholes, if not more. But let's look at, I guess, to kind of finish it off, I'm going to ask you for some bold predictions for the rest of this year and the future. But let's finish it off.
We're
going to hold you to it.
What are some positive outcomes that we'll see coming out of the current situation with the Canadian economy?
Hopefully we get our house in order, because I think the last 10 years we've completely neglected our country, and there's been a lot of wasted energy focusing on the things that really didn't matter. And even though I did not vote for the current government in power, he seems to be tackling certain things with the vigor to build the country and make it better. Like there was the announcement he's spending the money on the military. We should have a military. We should, even if it's just like up and down the coast for search and rescue. We are a massive country. Even if you use the military to fight wildfires or something like that,
or dig people out like they did back in the 80s, right? In the 90s.
So I think hopefully being threatened by a bully made us basically learn how to become self-sufficient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think from a cultural point of view, I don't know, like I think it's my opinion, you can tell me I'm absolutely wrong. I think Canada definitely has an identity, but a lot of people were trying to identify what's the true identity of Canada. And, you know, Canada, the nice, Canada, the friendly, there's all these, you know, connotations that come along with Canadians, which are all very positive. Obviously, you know, we live in a very changing country, and every province is changing, every city is different. I think it would be nice to just try and galvanize the identity of Canadians.
Yeah, and I think we've done a terrible job of having a Canadian identity. And I think, like, look at your most recent passport you got.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing in the passport except cartoon characters. Like, it's basically a joke that we had a passport that celebrated our history, and it has been reduced to cartoon characters.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have done a terrible job building heroes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there used to be like the Heritage Minutes on TV.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of stuff we do very well, but we don't celebrate success.
Yeah.
We don't celebrate, you know, not that I'm saying that we should be building statues for every small thing.
No.
But also we shouldn't be necessarily tearing down statues like we did over the last number of years. And, you know, if you were to say who is the number one Canadian hero, people usually say Terry Fox, which, you know, if you think about it, that was 83, 84, it was like 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So for the
nobody
last...
else has done anything.
No, but for the last 40 years, there's no Canadian identity.
Yeah.
Okay, Wayne Gretzky, but then he got thrown on the
he
got thrown on the scap because he was supporting Trump.
He's gone.
He's gone. Like, you know, there are people
Maybe
who
McDavid.
Simulu, here we go.
McDavid,
it's our guy.
if they pull it together.
Maybe
No,
McDavid.
but also it's like, well, think about the U.S. and maybe the U.S. does a little bit too much hero worship.
Yeah.
But there is something in the middle that, who, like somebody who wins a Nobel Prize, somebody who adds to humanity, makes it a better place, and moves the country forward. There's an absence.
Well, someone who got their citizenship, you know, fairly recently, I went through all of the tests and all the practice tests, and I learned there's a lot more to the story than I ever knew about it. Obviously, that's going to be the same with every country, the more you dig into it. But, you know, scientists and artists and poets and all these fantastic Canadians over the years, astronauts, I think I agree with you, just maybe aren't, you know, celebrated enough. My position on, you know, the statue pulling down, like, I understand the sentiment behind it, but I'm of the position of, like, let's leave it. Let's not destroy books. You know, let's study them objectively. Let's use them objectively to learn from it. Because if we start erasing the bad parts of history, there's a good chance that we're going to start repeating them. And I'm not going to mention what's happening down in the South being a parody to anything, but, you know, you can draw your own conclusions. You know, I think galvanizing and coming together. And that sounds, you know, a little bit mushy and you know, cliche, but I think it's the reality of what we have to do.
Yeah, and like just talking about like heroes, like so like Marc Garneau, who was the first Canadian space, died I think last week. You could tell who the first American space was, like Alan Shepard. Like how many people could name who the first Canadian space was? Like, simply put. And, you know, we don't recognize people who make a difference.
There's some fantastic Canadians in the NBA Finals right now. Okay, just to finish off, bold predictions for Q3, Q4 of this year, if you don't mind, and into the future.
Okay, I'm going to answer everything with maybe. What I would say is that there's a beginning and a middle and an end to everything. This down slope of real estate is not going to continue. There'll be some event, whether it's interest rates going down to, let's say, 3.5, there'll be some event that will make people want to buy again. And I have no clue what that is. Nobody has any clue what that is. If they say they have a clue, they're lying. But at some point, it's going to switch. And there's an economist from CIBC who basically makes a presentation that there's always the same demand in any given period. That there are so many people that want to buy a house in 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24. And it's usually a straight upward sloping line.
Right.
But people shift from period to period. So when there was the fear of missing out, and interest rates were low, well, maybe someone that was really going to buy a house in 2023 bought a house in 2021 sooner, because they didn't want to miss out.
Yeah.
At some point, there's going to be this pent-up demand, and it's going to open like a floodgates.
Yeah.
And nothing in real estate happens gradually. It turns on a switch, and all of a sudden, the market changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at some point, that is going to happen. It's going to, like, guess what? Sales are going to hit a point, and then all of a sudden, there's going to be a jump.
Yeah.
And when that jump happens, you know,
then the prices go up quickly. Like, there's no time to wait. Like, then it's like such a drastic. One house sells for $100,000 more, than the next house sells for $150,000 more, than the next house. That becomes the new norm.
Exactly.
And everyone was always talking about the bubble's going to burst. The bubble's going to burst.
Well, the bubble's burst.
But here's the thing: it never really burst. It just deflated.
Yeah.
And my point is, it took. Okay, you want to talk about like a huge drop? Let's talk about 20-25% in, valuation of a home, right? Depending on the market, we're talking more in the tens and the teens, but that happened over a very long period. It took a good 3, 6, 9, 12 months, 18 months in some areas for those prices to really come down. But, when we're talking about the market flipping, all it takes is that place sold on the street a little bit more. All of a sudden, that place sold on the street. And just this Canadian thing. You want to talk about Canadian identity? My observation, Canadians love, and let's talk about Ontarios, because I can't really comment on the rest of them, but Torontonians, GTAians, whatever you want to call them, they love to do the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, but let me kind of put a contrarian view on here. Is there's a lot of people sitting on places that they're holding onto with their fingertips. So before it gets better, it might get worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Like the number of people that we see that have 2 mortgages or 3 mortgages on a property that they couldn't make their payments. They might have gotten the property either through fraud and could never afford their mortgage payment because they were thinking they were going to flip it. There is a point that also these people have constantly kicked the can down the road for the last 3 years.
And they can't continue.
They can't keep on going. Like, there's a house that an appraisal we got today, people's credit scores are in the 400s.
How do you get a credit score that low?
That takes a lot of skill. Credit scores go from 300 to 900.
Yeah.
And, they need 80% loan to value to refinance their house because they're still in debt. But the correct answer is that they should sell their house.
Yeah.
Because no lender who will give them a mortgage, they can't make their payments.
Yeah.
And you're just kicking the can in the road. And once again, as I said, you don't need a lot of those people, but there's enough people that are just hanging on that I think that we have to kind of clear out the market. And there has not been, unfortunately, enough pain yet to basically do that. So when you say, what is I think that there's still, prices are going to go down, which is why long-term happiness is important. But prices will go down. But then once the market gets cleaned up, then they're going to...
so a little down and then a way up.
Well,
maybe.
But this is the thing that's important. In a healthy market, prices don't have to go up. We need transactions.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because right now there's no transactions. And the market's paralyzed. But if all of a sudden that person has to sell because the lender's not going to renew, well, guess what? They have to sell. Yeah. That's going to create a transaction. Someone's going to sell that. They're going to have to sell. They're going to buy that house. Yeah. Someone else is going to have to sell that house. And it just creates an avalanche of every purchase results in 4 other transactions because someone buys, someone buys, someone buys.
Which affects the economy in so many other positive ways.
Yes.
So. Well, I think that's all we have time for. I mean, we could probably go on forever. But what's the takeaway? I guess it's the
takeaway is find happiness.
Yeah.
And if you find happiness, these 2 great individuals have a place for you to buy.
Yeah.
That's right. And then when you need mortgages, we've got the mortgage guys.
We have
people.
we have the lawyers, we got the mortgage, we got it all.
And I think, just to end it off, just getting the right advice at this point in time, whether it be from your accountant, whether it be from your mortgage broker, whether it be from your agent. I mean, it's just more important than ever. Don't pay attention to the headlines. Speak to the professionals that do this for a living and live and breathe it.
Amazing.
That's what I'd say.
Thank you for having me.
Shawn, thanks so much for having you on.
So
and
interesting.
We'll have some video
We'll
footage
talk
and
in
stuff.
2028.
Yeah, we'll talk in 2028. I don't know if this podcast, maybe it's decommissioned by then.
No. Hope not.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And we'll speak to you guys soon. Bye.